Stephanie White revealed that Indiana began rebuilding Makayla Timpson's role in February, months before her career-high night in Atlanta. That work produced a new roll-and-cut partner for Caitlin Clark, and the next 4 road games will show how far that change can travel under pressure. Indiana beat Atlanta 95-91 in overtime, with Timpson scoring 20. Clark added 26 points and 9 assists, yet White's post-game explanation supplied the missing timeline behind a sudden breakthrough for a second-year forward. Indiana had spent 6 months changing how Timpson moved, where she received the ball, and which assignments she could handle beside Clark. The new part was not her athletic ability, it was the precision attached to it. Atlanta showed the result under pressure, not the beginning of it. Indiana selected Timpson 19th overall in the second round of the 2025 draft after 4 productive seasons at Florida State. Her senior year included 17.5 points, 10.6 rebounds, and 3.1 blocks per game. She also collected 350 rebounds and rejected 103 shots, becoming the 7th Atlantic Coast Conference player to reach 100 blocks in one season. Those numbers were hard to miss, and Timpson left Tallahassee as Florida State's career leader in both rebounds and double-doubles. Indiana had no difficulty seeing those physical tools on film. Professional basketball demanded a different kind of precision, especially inside an offense already built around established front-court players and Clark's unusual passing range. Size and timing carried Timpson into the league, but Indiana needed those gifts to function inside faster reads rather than familiar college possessions. The February visit clarified what Indiana believed still needed work before Timpson entered her second training camp. White and the Fever staff met her at Unrivaled, where White recalled telling Timpson to come in early and prepare for extra work. Indiana considered her a little bit behind where we'd hoped she'd be, an assessment tied to that preseason stage rather than her current level inside Indiana's plans. The wording was blunt, and Timpson answered it through action. Instead of waiting for camp to expose the same gaps, she reported early and began training with player development coach Keith Porter. This intervention arrived before the calendar forced one, giving Porter time to rebuild details while the rotation existed only on paper and competitive games had not begun. And that's when the timeline changed, because White later called the player who reached camp a different player from February. College production did not disappear when Timpson reached Indiana, but the Fever had no reason to reproduce Florida State's offense around her. Near the basket, she already knew how to establish position, rebound through contact, and finish above smaller defenders. Her new job began several steps away from the rim. A front-court partner beside Clark must recognize openings while several defenders watch the ball, then move before those defenders recover their original positions on the same beat. That changed when Indiana shifted Timpson from waiting for entry passes toward off-ball cuts, uphill dribble handoffs, and hard dives after screens. Every task reduced the time available for hesitation, which meant Timpson's value would depend on reading space before the ball reached her. Timing, not strength, became the steering wheel for her new role. The cutting assignment turned Timpson's length into a direct response to the attention Clark commands above the arc. Defenders begin leaning toward Clark as she crosses half-court, leaving the players behind them balancing 2 threats without a comfortable sightline. A stationary target makes that balance easier, so Timpson now attacks the space behind the low defender, while Clark controls the first coverage. If help steps toward Clark, the pass travels over or around it. If help stays home, Clark keeps a cleaner lane through the entire half-court action. That choice keeps failing in different directions for the defense. What looks like an easy finish begins with Timpson reading the defender's shoulders, choosing the blind side, and leaving before the opening becomes obvious. Her touch may end the play, but the cut starts changing the possession several beats before Clark releases the pass. Ball screens create the same pressure from a different angle, using Clark's range to pull 2 defenders farther from the basket during late possessions near half-court. When the screen lands cleanly, the screener receives a narrow route toward the rim before the weak side help begins rotating. The runway lasts only a moment before the help arrives. Timpson has to dive through it immediately, because a pause lets one defender guard both the rim and the next pass. Once she commits, Clark can throw high, slip the ball underneath, or find the teammate released by the collapsing coverage. Timpson does not need every pass for the action to work. A hard roll can drag the final defender 2 steps toward the basket, uncovering a shooter before the defense restores its shape. Indiana also placed Timpson inside uphill dribble handoffs, where the exchange compresses the reaction time available to every defender involved. Rather than waiting on the block, she meets a guard moving toward the middle, transfers the ball, and immediately becomes a screener or roller near the arc. Nothing in the exchange asks Timpson to stop and wait. Clark can turn the corner when her defender trails, while a switch may leave Timpson descending toward the rim against a smaller player. If neither opening appears, Indiana flows into another action without allowing all 5 defenders to settle into comfortable positions. One handoff can become a drive, roll, switch, or second pass before the defense identifies which option Clark has chosen. The possession keeps breathing, and Timpson's movement supplies the oxygen. None of those reads arrive automatically, even for a player with Timpson's unusual length and lift. She has to recognize when Clark draws 2 defenders, adjust the screen without blocking Clark's route, and leave as the passing lane starts to form with no wasted step. The margin for error stays narrow on every screen she sets. An early roll exposes the ball, while a late one gives the low defender enough time to recover and crowd the next action. Porter's sessions gave Timpson repetitions inside those small windows, and White gradually increased the number of decisions attached to her minutes. The improvement looked physical because Timpson finished at the rim, yet the more important change happened during the half-second before she moved. Faster recognition turned the same athletic tools into a cleaner professional role. Atlanta gave that work a demanding stage because Indiana needed 5 extra minutes, and White trusted Timpson throughout overtime in the first game of a 5-stop trip. Her 20 points did not come from designed post-ups or an offense that stopped moving to feature her. They came through Indiana's existing structure, with Timpson cutting into open space and following Clark's advantages toward the rim. That trust lasted through the final overtime possessions in Atlanta. Late-game fatigue usually exposes uncertain reads, yet Timpson kept working when the floor became crowded and each passing window narrowed. What nobody expected in February was this level of responsibility, not merely the career-high scoring number beside her name. By August, the player called in early had become one of the reasons Indiana survived a tense road game. Clark's 9 assists captured only part of her control in Atlanta, because White also praised her floor game across the previous 4 or 5 contests under pressure. That description covered pace, matchup selection, and the timing required to move a defense before sending the next pass. Timpson now gives those decisions another destination above the crowd. Because she can catch outside a defender's reach, Clark can attempt deliveries that would become reckless with a smaller or slower target. Even after months of work, those margins remain thin for both players. A pass may miss the ideal angle and still succeed because Timpson turns the air above a defender into usable court. Her willingness to sprint through the action keeps that space open for exactly as long as Clark needs it. Timpson's expanded defensive role may reveal even more than her career high-scoring total against Atlanta. Clark explained afterward that Timpson guarded every dream player who appeared, describing assignments that stretched from point guard through the post. The range still matters when Indiana starts switching late in games. One performance cannot guarantee every future matchup, but it shows how far White's trust moved after the blunt February evaluation. Instead of forcing a guard through repeated screens, Indiana can switch, contain the first move with Timpson's length, and give 4 defenders time to reset behind her. That option protects Clark from some difficult chases without pretending Timpson can erase every offensive matchup by herself. Versatility buys seconds, and those seconds often decide whether a defense stays organized. Her college shot blocking remains useful when those switches lead back toward the paint, though Indiana needs more than highlight rejections. Timpson recorded 103 blocks during her final Florida State season, a number that established how naturally she tracks the ball near the rim at full speed. The first action carries more value than one blocked shot. If she keeps a smaller handler from turning the corner, Indiana avoids emergency help and protects the passing lanes behind the play. Against a post player, her reach can challenge the release without demanding an immediate double team from the nearest guard. The result is a defense finishing more possessions in balance, rather than scrambling through 2 rotations before anyone secures the rebound. Timpson's best stop may end without a statistic attached to it. Balanced defense feeds the part of Indiana's offense Clark controls best, because an organized stop produces a cleaner path into transition. When 3 teammates avoid collapsing toward the rim, someone can release sooner and place the outlet in Clark's hands before the opponent organizes. The outlet changes the pace before the defense can set. Timpson can sprint into the next screen or continue toward the basket, forcing a retreating defender to choose between Clark and the rim. That connection rarely appears in a box score, but it links Timpson's defensive flexibility to the cutting role Indiana rebuilt during the spring on the next possession. One assignment creates the next opportunity without requiring a timeout or a designed touch. The result is value that can survive a quiet scoring night, because her movement keeps shaping possessions even when Clark passes elsewhere. Credit for that development belongs to Timpson, even though White and Porter supplied the structure around it. White identified the gap, Porter organized the early sessions, and Indiana narrowed the assignment before expanding it as Timpson became more comfortable through the weeks before camp. Timpson still completed every repetition and absorbed every correction herself. Clark benefits from the finished product, but she did not create Timpson or perform the 6 months of work that changed this role. That point also prevents a false contest with Aliyah Boston, whose screening, passing, interior scoring, and defensive value remain central to Indiana. White now owns different answers for different front-court matchups against each opponent. Timpson can supply vertical range, switching, and off-ball activity without turning one useful combination into a permanent hierarchy. The Atlanta result deserves restraint, because 20 points represent Timpson's career high rather than her nightly expectation. Opponents will study where Indiana finds her, change the weak side coverage, and test whether the new reads survive a different scouting plan from opponent to opponent. Some teams will switch before contact, while others keep a defender near the rim and invite another fever player to shoot. That variation is expected now across a 5-game road trip. There will be nights when the cutting lane closes, the lob disappears, and Timpson finishes with a small number beside her name. None of that erases the role, because screens, switches, hard rolls, and defensive assignments continue when Clark sends the final pass elsewhere. A useful system cannot depend on reproducing one career high every night. White's February account gives Atlanta weight without pretending that one result settled Indiana's rotation. The staff saw a gap, moved Timpson's work forward, and slowly trusted her with more decisions on both ends. Atlanta tested those decisions after 40 minutes, when tired players and shorter possessions tend to expose uncertain timing. Indiana did not discover a 20-point scorer during overtime. It watched a 6-month development plan survive the part of a road game that strips away comfortable reads. The timing makes this role more valuable for White now. With almost no practice time during Indiana's longest trip, a front-court option that travels cleanly carries more value than one isolated scoring burst. Atlanta supplied proof of progress, while the schedule supplies the next examination. 5 road games in 8 days began with Atlanta on August 16th, creating Indiana's longest trip of the season. Toronto follows on August 18th, Dallas comes 2 days later, and New York waits on August 22nd before Chicago the next night. 5 games leave little room for repair between each opponent. White must manage fatigue, shifting matchups, and changing front-court demands without the usual space for a complete practice correction. That pressure moves Timpson's development from an interesting side story into a practical part of Indiana's playoff push. A rim runner who does not require post touches can work beside several guards, while a switchable defender gives White another way to protect Clark throughout this trip. The February work produced a role designed to travel under pressure. Each remaining opponent will test a different part of the redesign, which prevents Atlanta from becoming the only evidence that matters. Toronto brings unfamiliar expansion combinations, Dallas arrives after 1 recovery day, and New York can punish the smallest hesitation in a switch during the same week. The tests arrive in different forms across 4 cities this week. Chicago follows immediately after New York, forcing Indiana to make another adjustment without recovery time or a normal preparation window. Timpson's point total may rise or fall, but White's willingness to keep assigning difficult work will reveal whether the trust holds. Clark makes that trust visible whenever Timpson times a cut correctly. The harder task belongs to Timpson, who must process the opening at Clark's speed and move before the lane becomes visible to everyone. White's postgame explanation turned one career high into a 6-month timeline that now has a clear beginning and an immediate test. February produced the direct evaluation, Porter's early sessions rebuilt the details, and training camp gave Indiana a player prepared for a narrower, faster job before the season opened. The sequence now carries hard evidence from the Atlanta win. Cuts replaced stationary possessions, dribble handoffs made Timpson a connector, and hard rolls converted Clark's gravity into pressure near the rim. Wider defensive trust allowed White to use Timpson across Atlanta's lineup, with each responsibility creating space for the next one. Clark described Timpson as scratching the surface, leaving the outcome open. By August 23rd, Indiana will have completed 5 road games in 8 days, and the February project will have faced 4 more opponents.